Hello, my name is Fernando-Fernandez. I'm a technical architect, and I'm going to show today how to implement a browser extension to work with Flows, Salesforce Flows. Uh, I will try to show this in less than 30 minutes. It's a lot to show it. So here's my plan. I want to create a browser extension that anytime a flow is open in Salesforce in one of those tabs, it will show a tooltip when I hover over each of those elements on the flow. And I want the tooltip to reveal things that otherwise I would have to click on the element. For example, on this get records shape, I would have to click to see, oh, okay, it's matching the field ID to the record ID. So I want to hover over this element, and then a tooltip would show me that information without me having to click. So let's get started. I'm going to switch to Visual Studio. I'm going to create a folder for this extension. Salesforce Flow Extension. And open. And the first thing will be to create the manifest file. And I'm going to copy and paste the one I already have, just because it's faster this way. Salesforce Flow Extension. Okay. The first item that's important in here is the content script. What this does is it injects the JavaScript inside each page whenever the page URL matches one of these URLs. So let me create this folder, scripts, and then create the content.js file. Okay. The other item that's important is to expose the script folder as a web accessible resource. And lastly, the background script. The background script, it creates a service worker on the browser that will respond to multiple tabs. And I'm going to show later why this is necessary. So let me create the background JS. Okay. And the permission I need is to be able to run scripts, get the active tab, and read the cookies. And I'm reading the cookies in order to get the session ID of the Salesforce connection in order to be able to query the tooling API. Okay. So that's basically it. And you can check the format and the options of this manifest.json in the Chrome extension documentation. Let's see. There are three main types of extensions. The one on the examples from Google is the reading time. The reading time shows how to implement content scripts, the scripts that run on every page when you open them in a tab. And you can see here, if you scroll down, the content script. This is what I'm using. The other, let's see, focus mode. Does it use background? Yes. The other one is the focus mode, which uses the background script. And here it's showing how to create a background script. The background script is mostly used to listen to messages sent from the main tab. Now, okay, let's proceed. Now I'm going to create the content script. So here's the plan. First, the content script will check whether the Salesforce page is open. If it is, then it will fetch the session ID from within the cookie, then call the tooling API to get the flow definition. The flow ID will be like this, right? You can see it highlighted. It will be the last parameter of the URL. So that's how I'm gonna get the flow ID to get the flow definition from the tooling API. After I get the flow definition, I create mouse over event handlers on each of those flow elements. And inside of each of those handlers, I display a tooltip with information from the flow definition that I queried via the tooling API. Okay. So for that purpose, I'm going to create a couple of constants. This constant will be using when sending a message to the background script. I'm going to create a few variables. The SF host and the session ID will be used to query the tooling API, and the flow definition will receive the result from the tooling API. So the very first thing on that this script will execute is to check, does the open document contains those elements, the class SFDC body, the Apex CSI page, or this identifier or loading box. If the page contains, then we are safe to assume that this is a Salesforce page and the extension should run on it. Then the first thing is to get the host and session. And this is what I'm creating a message and sending to the background tab. The background tab will be listening to this message using this identifier, and I'm gonna pass the URL. After that, it's gonna query the cookies and return the host and the session ID. And after I store that locally on this script, I then call another method that I'm gonna create that will use the host and session ID to get the flow definition via the tooling API. So let me save this. And since we're dealing with this message, I'm going to switch to the background script. See, I'm declaring the same constant. Now, one note is that we cannot import a module from one side to the other. This is the way I found that to overcome that limitation. There are workarounds to import modules, but they're vastly more complicated than this. That's why I'm not showing it here. So the very first step of this background script is to declare a listener that will receive a message and a callback. And it will check if the message is the get host and session, it will execute this method. So let me code that method or show how to code it. Okay, So first, the method to get host and session will create this parameter cookie details with the SID. SID is the identifier of the session ID inside the cookie. The URL and the store ID, this is usually null, so I'm not gonna go into it. So the very first thing is to read the cookies. So it read the cookie for that URL and get the value SID. Once it gets it, it checks. If the cookie was not read, it responds with null, it failed. Otherwise, it proceeds and try to get the secure cookie. So the very first time we read a cookie will be an unsecured cookie. And that is just to get the right URL. And just to get the org ID of that tab that we want the session ID for. Because the unsecured cookie, it will have a session ID, but we cannot use that to read via tooling API. So we read the unsecured cookie first, and then I extract the org ID from that cookie value. I do that because the SID has the format of the session ID. It starts with the org ID, followed by the exclamation point, and then some other string. So I just extract the first part of the session ID from the unsecured cookie. Then next, I read all the cookies for the domain salesforce.com and read the SID for those. This time I'm passing the flag secure true, meaning I want to read the secure cookies. So I get all of the cookies for the salesforce.com, and then I scan them, trying to find the one that starts with the same org ID as the tab I'm calling from. And I do that by using this find on the array of cookies. So if it finds, then I call back the function I received via parameter, and then I pass the domain of the cookie and the value, which is the session ID. So this is basically it. The background script purpose is just to be able to read cookies from the browser window universally, meaning it will work on any tab. So if you have the extension running in more than one tab, more than one org, if you're logged in multiple orgs, it will work the same. It will try to find the SID of the insecure cookie and then use the org ID from it to match to one of the other cookies. Okay, so back to the content script. The next step is the set flow definition from tooling API. So let's go and copy that one. Okay, I'm passing the base URL and the session ID to it. The first thing I do is to read the location.search, which is this parameter here. Everything after the question sign, question mark. And then from that string, I extract the flow ID using a little bit of regex. And then I create the endpoint URL by concatenating base URL service/data, the tooling API version, which is I'm using v42.0, and then passing the parameter that I want to use the tooling API, query an S object. The S object name will be flow, and this is the flow ID. And then I prepare the request using the method get, passing the content type application/JSON, and the authorization will be bearer plus the session ID. And once I prepare the request, I send the request, I receive the request and convert to JSON, and then I save the metadata that I received from the tooling API. So this will store something like this here. This is the same request I'm sending via Insomnia, which is just another tool like Postman that you can use to test APIs. And this is what the data I'm interested in, the metadata. It lists action calls, assignments. If you scroll further down here, decisions. And let's see what's next. I skipped a bit. Okay, cool. Decisions, formulas, metadata values. Okay, this is what's interesting. Record creates, deletes, record lookups, which is it contains useful information. Let's see, where record updates, screens, if it is a screen flow, variables, and that's mostly it. Now, on each of those elements I scanned through in this Insomnia API result, I'm going to check if each of those elements contain an entry with the label matching the label the mouse is hovering over. So for example, I'm hovering over, let's see here, this shape here. The label is Get Active Service Appointment Group. So I'm going to find it here to be able to identify which of those entries, metadata entries, is the one that corresponds to the shape I'm hovering over. And then I will check the sub items and extract information to put it on the tooltip. So back to the code. The next thing is, after I get the flow definition, I do the add or hover events. That's another method I created. And let me copy it. Let's see. Yeah. So I read the flow screen, searching for those two CSS selectors. The first one, div.node container, is for when the flow is on freeform. The second one is for when the flow is on auto layout, which is right now. Each way the flow is displayed, it displayed the HTML elements differently. So that's why I have to put those both in here and do a query selector all to get the shapes, to get the labels. So I check if the shape doesn't contain anything, it probably means that the flow hasn't been drawn on the screen yet, or hasn't finished being rendered on the screen. So I do this to try again in 2 seconds later. So it will keep running this code and checking for those flow shapes until the flow is rendered and something appear on the screen, and then this query selector all will retrieve something. So once it's done, I clear the timeout, the timer, because this is using a timer of 2 seconds to run, to check again every 2 seconds. So I clear that timer, which is saved as a global variable here. And then I go over each of those shapes and extract the title. The title is the same as the label. If the flow is in free form, it will be inside of a span element. So then I'll have to get the text content of that span instead of the title of the div. And next here, since it's inside of a span, I need to find the grandparent of that element to be able to put the hover event on it, because I cannot just use the span element. Otherwise, I would have to hover over the text of the flow shape instead of the uh, icon of the flow shape. That's why I'm going to the grandparent of that element. This is for freeform. Otherwise, if it's in auto layout, I just extract the flow element name from inside the title, or rather label, using a little bit of regex. Next, I set the flow element name, which is the label of the flow shape, inside of a custom attribute, so that I can use that custom attribute inside the event mouse over and mouse out. So running on mouse over, it will display the tooltip and pass the value true. If on mouse out, meaning that I move the mouse outside the element, it will call the same method but pass false to it. So let me show how that method is being implemented. And it's the most complicated of the code so far. Okay. Okay, display tooltip, it receives the event and the display flag. Now it checks if there is a flow definition. If there isn't, it just cancels out and doesn't do anything. First, it removes the tooltip. By default, whenever I move the mouse, it will remove any tooltip. Now, if I pass it false, I'm just going to return leaving the tooltip removed. So it will disappear from the screen. Otherwise, it will proceed to the rest of the code. So here I get the flow element name, which is inside the custom attribute I created. And then I create this array of flow definition entries. The ones I showed before: record creates, record lookups, subflows, decisions, screens, etc. And then I scan each of those metadata items and run the get node method. The get node method, I'm going to copy and paste right here. Let's see here. It's just checking if the array passed has entries. If it doesn't, it bails out. Otherwise, it finds inside of that array a node that contains a matching label. So I'm matching the element name to the label. Just like I explained before, the label will be, for example, the get active service appointment group for this first shape here. It will try to match it to the label inside one of those entries. For example, this is a record lookup. It matches the label here, and then it will return this entire entry on the get node method. Okay. And once it finds a node, it will bail out from the loop and proceed to the rest of the code. Now, the rest of the code is basically populating the tooltip and positioning on the screen. So it first read the flow element position and add an offset. So it will parse the left CSS style from the element and the top CSS style. And then it will add 150 pixels to it to move the tooltip to the right of the shape and add 25 pixels to the top to move it slightly below the shape. And then the first thing to create the tooltip, I create a div. I set the style of the div to have a dark gray border of 1 pixel. Background will be light yellow. The width will be 30 characters, more or less. The position will be absolute, and the z-index will place it on top of everything. So if there is anything below it, it will overwrite it on the screen. And then I position the top and the left of the tooltip. Then next, I create the title and put it as bold and add the title to the tooltip, add a line break to the tooltip. Then next, the code will run different things depending on the type of shape I'm hovering on. So for example, if it is an input assignment, meaning it's an assignment of variable shape, then I will scan the array of input assignments and find each of the assignments. So for example, let me see if I can find an assignment. Okay, there are 2 assignments in this flow. Let's see, show LWC buttons. So let me find this here. Show LWC. Okay, it found this assignment here. So it will get this field assignment assigned to reference, the operator, and the value. So for example, it will show that on the tooltip, show cancel button from flow equals Boolean value true. So this is what it's doing. It's getting the field and the value element by reference, and then adding to the tooltip. Next, I'm checking for screen elements and show the fields that the screen element is accepting data for. So I get the field text, and then I create a list, a string. I concatenate a list of assignments assigned to reference equals name. This is all elements from the metadata. And then I add it to the tooltip. Now, if it is an action, meaning it's an Apex script or class being called, I just put the action name followed by the action type. If there are the rules, then I do a couple of nested loops to get the condition name followed by the condition steps. For example, on this one here, the condition name is service appointment group valid, and the condition steps will be the resource operator and value. So I put them here and concatenate them and put it on the tooltip. Next, I'm handling lookups, which is almost the same as assignment. It's basically similar to the other shapes. It's always the same logic. I scan the elements in the array and concatenate the proper field to the tooltip. Once I've done that for all of the possible shapes, I append the tooltip to the parent node, of the shape I'm hovering on. And the effect is that tooltip will be displayed. So let's save this. Save this. Now we have the entire extension ready. So what I'm going to do now is go to the browser. And since this has not been packaged, this extension has not been packaged, not been uploaded to Google, and not submitted for security review, I'm just testing it locally. So I just go to the extensions and click load unpacked, and it will prompt me for the directory I want to upload. Then I select here. It's loaded. So now I can cancel this and refresh the flow screen. It will run the code. And now you see you have the tooltip shown for each of those shapes. Now, you may want to debug this. So in that case, you can click inspect, and it will show something like this, sources. And then on the sources tab, you're going to go to content script, and you're going to find the folder of the extension you have and click content.js. And this is the code that will run. So you can, let's see, put a pause on the display tooltip method. When you hover it, it's gonna pop into the function, and then you can step through the code and see what it's doing, the value of the variables. It will all be displayed on this right panel. Remove those breakpoints. And this is how it's doing it. That's it. Thanks for watching.